The neighbors still remember that night. The storm, the thunder, and the sound of a dog howling into the wind. No one knew why. But when officers entered the house on Maple Street, they found something that would haunt the town for years. A crime buried beneath fear, and a dog who refused to leave the side of a lifeless child. Rex wasn't just any dog. He was the only witness left alive. Years later, when a quiet policeman took in a broken little girl who barely spoke, the truth began to whisper again. In nightmares, in drawings, in the soft growl of a dog who hadn't forgotten. This is the story of what really happened that night, and how love, loyalty, and courage found their way back from the dark. Morning sunlight spilled across Maple Street, washing the quiet American suburb in soft gold. The lawns were trimmed, mailboxes freshly painted, and wind chimes sang gently in the breeze. To anyone passing by, the house at the end of the street looked like a picture of peace. White fences, flower beds, and the distant laughter of two little girls playing in the yard. The older sister, a 6-year-old with tangled blonde hair, chased after a soap bubble that floated toward the sky. Her laughter carried the innocent melody of childhood, wild, free, untouched by fear. Beside her toddled her baby sister, barely 21 months old, stumbling on unsteady legs but giggling each time she fell. Watching over them was Rex, a large German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat that shimmered like burnished bronze in the morning light. He stood tall and proud, ears perked, tail wagging gently as the children played. When the baby reached too close to the street, Rex barked once, deep and commanding, blocking her path with his body. The older girl giggled. "He's like a soldier," she said, petting his head. Rex lowered his ears, pressing into her small hand, as though understanding every word. From the porch, their father watched, coffee in one hand, newspaper in the other. He wore a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, and his hair was combed back with precision. To the world, Daniel Moore was the image of a devoted father, hard-working, calm, the kind of man who greeted his neighbors with a polite nod. But beneath that calm exterior lived something brittle. It showed in the way his eyes hardened too quickly when the children got too loud, in the way his jaw tightened when his wife once tried to correct him in public. She was gone now, visiting family, was what he told people. No one asked further questions. In small towns, sometimes politeness is just another form of fear. Inside the house, the air felt different. It was clean, almost sterile, as if laughter itself was out of place there. The ticking clock on the wall was loud, too loud. The little girl noticed it one morning and whispered to Rex, "It sounds angry." Rex tilted his head, as if agreeing. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the window, the older girl sat at the table coloring. Daniel entered, his expression unreadable. "Why is this mess still here?" he muttered. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that silences a room. "I'll clean it, Daddy," the girl said quickly, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just stared. Too long, too sharp. Rex, who had been lying nearby, lifted his head. His eyes locked on Daniel. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Quiet, but unmistakable. "Quiet," Daniel snapped, pointing at the dog. Rex's ears flattened, but his gaze never broke. For a moment, the air between man and dog crackled, like a wire pulled too tight. Later at dinner, the family sat in strained quiet. The only sound was the clink of cutlery. The older girl's sleeve slipped up slightly, revealing a faint bruise on her arm. It wasn't new. Daniel noticed her hesitation and forced a smile. "You need to be more careful, sweetheart," he said, reaching across the table to brush her hair. She flinched. So subtly, it was almost invisible. Almost. Rex saw it. His ears pricked, his body tense. He could feel the shift, the kind of darkness humans ignored but dogs could smell. His tail stopped wagging. His breath quickened. Something in this house wasn't right. Outside, the light began to fade. The sunset dripped across the horizon like spilled paint, red bleeding into orange, orange fading into gray. The once golden house now looked different, its shadows stretching long and thin across the lawn. Neighbors passed by on their evening walks. They waved, and Daniel waved back, smiling the kind of smile that photographs well. No one saw the clenched fist behind that smile. No one saw the girl's fearful glance toward the doorway. That night, the air was thick, too quiet. The clock ticked louder than usual, its rhythm like a heartbeat echoing through the kitchen walls. The little girl drew pictures of Rex and her baby sister, her crayon pressing too hard, breaking halfway through the paper. Daniel entered again. He was still in his work shirt, tie loosened, the faint smell of whiskey following him. He glanced at the drawing, then at the scattered crayons. "Didn't I tell you to clean up after yourself?" The girl froze. I was just..." Before she could finish, his hand slammed down on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a thunderclap. Rex leapt to his feet, growling now. Not softly this time, but with full force. His fur bristled, his body positioned between the man and the child. "Sit down!" Daniel shouted, voice laced with fury. But Rex didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on Daniel's hand, the same hand that had struck too many times before. For a moment, the two stared at each other, man and dog, predator and protector. The girl could barely breathe. Finally, Daniel stepped back, muttering under his breath, "Stimsums." He grabbed his coat and left the room, slamming the door behind him. The echo rattled the walls. The girl sank to her knees, wrapping her small arms around Rex's neck. The dog didn't move. He just stayed still, chest rising and falling, as if standing guard against ghosts. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful again. Wind rustled through the trees, and from the next house over, someone played a soft country song. Life went on, unaware of the storm quietly forming behind the white fence on Maple Street. Inside, Rex finally lay down beside the girl's bed. His eyes stayed open long after she drifted to sleep, ears twitching at every creak in the wooden floorboards. Somewhere deep in his instincts, he knew. This peace was fragile, and the danger wasn't gone. It was waiting. The golden calm of Maple Street was only the calm before the storm. The rain began long before the shouting. It came quietly at first, a whisper on the roof, a rhythm against the windows, as if the heavens were warning what was to come. The clock struck midnight, and the wind outside howled down Maple Street, rattling fences and bending branches. Inside the house, shadows stretched across the walls like dark fingers. Rex was the first to sense it. He lifted his head from the foot of the bed, ears twitching. His amber eyes flicked toward the hallway, where a door creaked open. The older girl stirred in her sleep, clutching her blanket tight. From the nursery came a small cry. The baby's voice, soft and fragile, like a bird calling out in the storm. Down the hall, the sound of footsteps, uneven, heavy. Then came the metallic click of a bottle against the counter. The smell of whiskey drifted through the air. Daniel was awake. He moved like a man burdened by ghosts, his face pale under the flickering kitchen light. His shirt was half unbuttoned, collar damp with sweat. The world outside was chaos, but the storm within him was worse. "Stop crying!" he slurred, voice sharp as glass. The baby's sobs grew louder. The older girl sat up, heart hammering. She knew that tone. The one that came before broken plates, before slammed doors. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway, Rex following silently beside her. The closer they got to the nursery, the stronger the smell of alcohol, the heavier the air. When she reached the doorway, she froze. Her father stood over the crib, his hands gripping the railing, his shadow cast tall and monstrous on the wall. "Stop crying!" he barked again, shaking the crib once. The baby screamed. "Daddy, please!" the older girl whispered. Her voice barely carried over the thunder. He turned toward her, eyes wild, unfocused. "Go back to bed." She didn't move. Neither did Rex. The German shepherd growled, low and rumbling, the sound of a warning born from instinct. "Shut that dog up!" Daniel snapped, kicking at Rex's direction. Rex barked, loud, fierce, protective. He positioned himself between the man and the crib, teeth bared, fur bristling. "Get out of the way!" The next moment happened too fast. Daniel's hand lashed out, grabbing a wooden toy from the dresser. He swung. The toy cracked against Rex's side. The dog yelped, but didn't move away. Instead, he lunged forward, not to bite, but to push the man back from the crib. The older girl screamed. Thunder roared above them, drowning out the chaos for a heartbeat. Then came the crash. The sound of glass shattering as Daniel stumbled into the nightstand. The lamp fell, plunging the room into dim, trembling light. The baby's wails turned to gasps. The older girl crouched under the table, her hands pressed to her ears. Through the cracks between her fingers, she saw everything. The violence, the fury, the shadow that swallowed the room whole. "Daddy, please stop!" she cried. But the man wasn't listening. His rage had no language anymore, just movement, raw and senseless. He struck out again and again until the room fell still. And then, silence. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that crushes everything beneath it. Rex stood trembling, panting heavily, his side bleeding where the toy had hit. He whined, pacing between the crib and the table. The air smelled of alcohol, fear, and something worse, something metallic. The older girl crawled out slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Sissy?" she whispered. No answer. She reached the crib. The baby lay motionless, her tiny hand dangling over the edge. Rex whimpered, pushing his nose against that hand, nudging it softly, as if to wake her. Once, twice. The small fingers didn't move. "Wake up!" the girl cried, shaking the crib. "Please, wake up!" Daniel stumbled backward, his breath ragged, eyes wide in shock at what he had done. No, he muttered, staring at his trembling hands. "It was an accident." She wouldn't stop crying. Rex barked again, one deep, accusing sound that filled the room. Daniel spun around, hatred flaring once more. "Shut up!" he roared, stepping toward the dog. But this time, Rex didn't move away. He stood tall, blocking the girl, his growl like thunder itself. For a moment it seemed as if Daniel might strike again, but something inside him broke. His shoulders sagged. He dropped the toy, stumbled toward the door, and disappeared into the storm outside. The wind howled through the open doorway, carrying rain into the room. The curtains whipped violently as lightning flashed, illuminating the chaos. The overturned chair, the broken lamp, the crib, the child. The older girl fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Rex pressed against her side, his head bowed low. His body shook, but his eyes never left the crib. Outside, the rain poured harder. The thunder softened, fading into the distance. Inside, there was only the steady drip of rainwater through the broken window, each drop falling like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to the child they had lost. Rex lay down beside the crib, resting his muzzle against the baby's still hand one last time. His breath came in slow, uneven tremors. The girl crawled closer, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. "Don't leave me, Rex," she whispered through her tears. He didn't move. He just stayed there, keeping watch, as if standing guard between innocence and the darkness that had taken everything. The wind outside began to quiet, but the silence inside the house was unbearable. A silence that would echo for years. And on Maple Street, beneath the flickering streetlight, a lone German shepherd lifted his head and howled, long, mournful, broken. It was the sound of grief, of love, and of something lost forever. That night, the golden calm of Maple Street finally shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. Morning crept over Maple Street, pale and cold. The house that once shimmered under golden light now sat silent behind yellow police tape. Rain had washed away most of the blood, but not the heaviness that clung to the air. Inside, the nursery was a ruin of overturned furniture and damp toys, a graveyard of innocence. Detectives moved quietly through the rooms, their voices hushed, their expressions tired. A camera flashed. The sound was sterile, mechanical. Click, click, click. Recording tragedy without emotion. The little girl sat on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, wearing a blanket that smelled faintly of Rex's fur. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide and empty. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had run out hours ago. Rex lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, watching every movement in the room. He hadn't left her side since the night before. A tall officer crouched down to her level. "Sweetheart, can you tell us what happened?" he asked softly. She didn't speak, her fingers tightened on the blanket. Rex let out a low growl, almost imperceptible, as if warning the stranger to back away. The officer sighed and stood. "She's not talking." In the corner, Daniel sat handcuffed, his shirt stained, his expression blank. "It was an accident," he said for the 10th time, voice shaky but rehearsed. "She fell. I tried to save her." The detective in charge scribbled a note but didn't look convinced. Still, the evidence was thin. No witnesses, no confession, no clear signs of a struggle that couldn't be explained away. And so the file would soon close. Another tragedy. Another line in a report. When they led Daniel away, the girl looked up. For a brief moment, their eyes met. His were cold, almost distant, as if she were already erased from his life. Rex rose, his teeth bared in silent fury. The officers tightened their grip on the leash around Daniel's wrists. "Get that dog out of here," he snapped. Rex barked once, deep and raw, echoing through the empty hall before the door shut behind them. Days passed. The investigation yielded nothing. The system, burdened with too many cases and too few answers, began to forget. Reporters came and went, chasing stories that sold better. Eventually, the house was sealed, and the little girl was taken away. Foster care, a new bed, new faces, and strangers calling her sweetheart while she stared blankly at the wall. She didn't speak much. She didn't sleep well either. But Rex was there. They sent him to the same foster home after the first family refused to take the dog, who wouldn't let anyone near the girl's bed. He ate little, his ribs showing beneath his thick coat, but he never left her side. At night, when nightmares clawed at her sleep, Rex would rest his head on her blanket until her trembling stopped. Sometimes she whispered into his fur, words no one else could hear. "You remember, don't you?" His ears twitched. A soft whine escaped his throat. Yes. He remembered everything. Months turned into years, or what felt like years to a child. Each home came with its own rules, its own routines, some kind, some cruel in small ways. Most never understood why the dog was so protective. One foster mother complained, "That animal's too aggressive. He growls every time I get close to her." "He's just scared," said another. But no one truly understood. Rex wasn't scared. He was guarding what was left. Then came the day that changed everything again. The social worker arrived, a woman in a gray suit with tired eyes and a clipboard. "We found a new placement for her," she said gently. "It's a better home, more stable." The little girl clutched Rex's collar. "Can he come?" The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. The new family can't take pets." Rex's ears perked. He looked from the girl to the woman, sensing the tension. The little girl began to shake her head violently. "No, no, he stays with me!" The woman knelt, trying to sound reassuring. "He'll be taken care of, I promise." Rex growled softly, stepping between them. His body was trembling, not with fear, but with something close to grief. The social worker called for help. 2 men approached, holding leashes and gloves. Rex backed up, pressing against the girl. She cried harder, clutching his fur so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Please, don't take him. He's all I have." The sound tore through the room, the kind of cry that cuts deep into the soul. They managed to pull Rex away, his claws scraping against the wooden floor, leaving scratches that would outlast the moment. He barked, struggled, twisted against their grip. The girl screamed his name over and over until her voice broke. "Rex! Rex!" When they reached the door, he turned his head one last time. Their eyes met, his, full of loyalty and confusion, hers, filled with despair too heavy for a child. Then the door closed. Silence. The little girl fell to the floor, her hands still gripping a few strands of fur that had caught on her sleeve. Outside, Rex howled. It wasn't the sharp bark of defiance. It was the sound of something ancient and broken. His body pressed against the chain-link fence as the car carrying the girl drove away. He howled until his voice cracked, until it became just air leaving his lungs. And then, slowly, the sound faded. For the first time since that night, he was alone. Weeks passed. The shelter where Rex was taken kept him in a small pen. The staff noted his behavior. Unresponsive, refuses food, whines at night. They didn't understand that he wasn't waiting for anyone else. He was waiting for her. Each time footsteps echoed through the corridor, he lifted his head. Each time the door opened, he hoped. But she never came. Some nights he lay awake, staring at the moonlight spilling through the bars. Somewhere out there he knew she was crying too. Somewhere out there, she still whispered his name before she slept. And so Rex waited. He waited with the same patience only a dog's heart can hold, loyal beyond reason, faithful beyond time. Because love, once forged in pain, does not vanish. It only waits for the day it can return home. The rain had returned the day Officer Mark Harris signed the papers. It wasn't a fierce storm like the one that had shattered Maple Street, but a gentle drizzle, steady, patient, cleansing. He stood under the awning of the foster center, watching the drops trail down the window pane, waiting for the little girl whose file he had read a dozen times, but could not forget. She came out quietly, led by a caseworker. Small, pale, eyes too old for her age. She held no toy, no bag, just a worn photograph in her fist. Mark knelt down to her level, offering a faint smile. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Mark. You can call me whatever feels right." The girl didn't answer. Her eyes flicked up for only a second, enough to study the lines of his face, the softness in his gaze, then dropped back to the floor. Mark didn't push. He simply extended his hand. After a long pause, she placed her tiny fingers in his palm. He noticed how cold they were. His home sat on the edge of town, a modest two-bedroom house with a front porch and an oak tree that creaked in the wind. It wasn't grand, but it was warm. It had been quiet for years since his wife, Emily, had passed. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that echoes through empty rooms. When he opened the door, the scent of coffee and old books filled the air. "Welcome home," he said gently. The girl didn't reply. She stood near the doorway, clutching the photo. Mark had prepared a small room for her, soft blankets, a nightlight shaped like a star, a bookshelf filled with storybooks. "This one used to be my daughter's," he said, placing a stuffed bear on the bed. His voice faltered slightly at the word daughter. It had been years since he'd said it out loud. That night, she sat on the edge of the bed, eyes blank, refusing to lie down. Mark waited in the hallway, unsure whether to comfort her or leave her be. He had been trained to defuse dangerous situations, to face armed suspects. But this, healing a child's broken heart? That was a different kind of courage. He turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open. "Good night, kiddo," he whispered. No reply. 2 weeks later, Rex came home. Mark had spent days making calls, convincing the animal shelter to let him adopt the German Shepherd that had refused to eat since separation. When the truck pulled into the driveway, Rex stepped out hesitantly, ribs showing, eyes dulled by grief, but still alert. The moment the girl saw him through the window, her world stopped. She ran to the door before Mark could react, flinging it open. "Rex!" It was the first sound she had made. A gasp more than a word, but it was something. Rex bounded toward her, tail wagging weakly, whining with joy that was half pain. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. He pressed his head against her chest and closed his eyes, exhaling a deep, trembling sigh, the sound of two souls finding their way back to each other. Mark stood in the doorway, blinking back tears. "Well," he murmured, "looks like I just got outnumbered." Life in the Harris home settled into a rhythm of quiet recovery. The girl still didn't talk much, but she followed Mark around, silently observing as he made breakfast, fixed fences, or read on the porch. Rex never left her side, trailing her like a shadow. At night, Mark would sit by her door and read aloud. "Once upon a time," he began each night, his deep voice gentle, unhurried. He read about courage, about heroes and loyalty, about wolves that turned into guardians. The girl never answered, but sometimes he saw her eyes flicker, just slightly, as if she were listening. Rex would curl up at her feet, his tail thumping once in acknowledgement when Mark closed the book. One evening, the rain returned, a soft, steady drizzle that painted the windows silver. The girl sat by the window, hugging Rex's neck, staring out at the drops racing each other down the glass. Mark brought her a cup of warm milk. "Storms aren't always bad," he said gently. "Sometimes they help things grow." She glanced at him but said nothing. He sat beside her, not too close, letting the silence stretch comfortably. "You know," he continued, looking at Rex, "he's a brave boy. Wouldn't even eat until he found you again. That's real loyalty right there." The girl looked down at Rex, whose eyes were half closed as he rested his head on her lap. She placed her small hand on his fur. Her lips trembled. "Rex," she whispered. Mark froze. It was so quiet. He thought he might have imagined it. But then she said it again, a little stronger this time, the faintest crack in the wall she had built around herself. "Rex." The dog's ears perked up instantly. He lifted his head and licked her cheek, tail wagging. The girl smiled, just a hint, fragile as a candle flame. Mark felt something inside him give way. He swallowed hard, pretending to clear his throat. But the tears came anyway. Silent, steady, unashamed. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's his name." Rex barked once, low and happy, as if affirming it. The girl reached for Mark's hand, hesitant, testing trust. When her fingers touched his, he didn't speak. He simply closed his hand around hers, gentle, firm, safe. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. The thunder had passed. Later that night, Mark peeked into her room. She was asleep, curled up beneath the blankets, Rex lying across the floor like a guardian angel. The nightlight glowed softly, casting shapes of stars across the ceiling. For the first time in years, Mark felt warmth fill the house, a warmth not born of routine or duty, but of quiet connection. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes wet. Then he whispered, "Welcome home, kiddo." Rex's tail thumped once in reply, and in the gentle rhythm of rain against the window, it sounded, just faintly, like the heartbeat of a home beginning again. It began with the screaming, soft at first, like a frightened whisper, then sharper, slicing through the midnight stillness like glass shattering in slow motion. "Daddy, stop! Don't hurt her!" Mark jolted awake. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he heard it again, the cry of a child caught between dream and memory. He ran down the hallway, heart pounding, the sound guiding him like a siren. The little girl sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, her small hands clutching the blanket like it could save her from the ghosts inside her mind. Rex stood beside her, barking softly, pacing in anxious circles. His tail was low, his ears pinned back, the posture of a protector who couldn't fight what he couldn't see. Mark knelt beside the bed, his voice calm but trembling. Hey, you're okay. You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe." But she didn't hear him. Her eyes were open, yet distant, trapped in some memory that didn't belong to this house this time. "She's crying. Daddy, stop!" Rex pressed his muzzle against her arm, whining softly. The moment his fur brushed her skin, her breathing slowed. Slowly, her small fingers unclenched. Her eyes flickered, and she looked around the room, confused, trembling, lost between two worlds. Mark exhaled shakily. "You're here now," he whispered, brushing her hair back. "You're home. He can't hurt you anymore." The nightmares came often after that. Some nights, she would thrash and cry. Other nights, she would whisper to the darkness, her words fractured, incomplete, but always the same. The man, the crying, the sound of something breaking. Mark didn't sleep much. He sat outside her door with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the silence after each storm. He'd seen trauma before. Victims who flinched at sirens. Children who shut down at every raised voice. But this was different. This wasn't fear. It was memory clawing its way to the surface. He began taking her to therapy, though she barely spoke during sessions. The therapist, a gentlewoman named Dr. Lane, encouraged art, crayons, colors, and open space for a child's truth to find shape. At first, her drawings were simple: flowers, clouds, Rex with his tongue out. But every so often, darkness crept in. The colors grew heavier, lines thicker. Red began to appear where it didn't belong. Streaks, smudges, shadows. Mark didn't comment. He just watched. Rex would sit beside her, chin on her knee, eyes following every crayon stroke as though guarding her even from paper ghosts. One afternoon, Mark sat across from Dr. Lane as the girl colored in the next room. "She's remembering," the therapist said softly. "Not all at once, but pieces, sensory triggers, emotional fragments." Mark nodded slowly. "I figured. She wakes up screaming about a baby sometimes. Always says, 'Don't hurt her.'" Dr. Lane hesitated. "That might be her sister." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked toward the open door, where the faint sound of crayons scratching filled the air. "So, what do I do?" "Don't force it," Dr. Lane said gently. "Let her tell it her way. When she's ready, she will." Mark nodded, but his chest felt tight. He'd spent his life chasing truth, evidence, reports, confessions. But this truth wasn't written in ink. It was drawn in crayon, buried in the heart of a child who had survived hell that night. Thus, rain returned, not harsh, but steady, washing the streets in silver. The little girl sat on the floor with a blank sheet of paper. Rex lay beside her, tail sweeping slowly, eyes half closed. Mark sat in the doorway, pretending to read, but watching. She chose her colors carefully, blue for the sky, green for grass. Then she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the box, trembling, before pulling out black. She began to draw shapes: a house, a small figure, another, taller one, then something else, a crib. Inside it, a smaller child with tears streaming down her face. And there, between them all, was Rex, his body positioned like a shield. But what drew Mark's breath away was the shadow. Behind the tall figure, she had drawn a massive, dark shape, jagged, undefined, consuming the light around it. The little girl's breathing quickened. Her hand pressed harder, the crayon snapping in half. "Hey, easy," Mark said softly, kneeling beside her. "It's just paper, sweetheart. You're okay." She looked up, eyes glassy. "He was mad," she whispered. Mark froze. "Who, honey?" Her lips trembled. "Daddy. He hurt her. He hurt my sister." Rex whined, pressing his nose to her shoulder. Mark swallowed hard, throat burning. He wanted to say something comforting, but there were no words for this kind of truth. He glanced at the drawing again. The emotion, the terrifying clarity of memory. This wasn't imagination. This was testimony. Mark sat back, hands trembling. His mind raced through every file, every statement from that night. He remembered the closed case, the father's lie. An accident, they'd called it. But this picture said otherwise. The child's voice cracked again. Rate, medium. She was crying, and he yelled. Rex barked. I hid. Her hand reached for the paper again, smudging the black shadow with her palm. I couldn't help her, she whispered. Mark gently took her hand, his voice breaking. You were just a little girl. It wasn't your fault. You did everything you could. She looked at him, eyes red, wet, but steady. Rex tried to save her. At that, Rex stood, pressing his head into her chest, whining softly. Mark couldn't stop the tears this time. They fell silently, his heart breaking for two children. One lost, one still haunted. He reached out, pulling her close. Rex curled around them both, a living barrier against the world. For a long time, none of them moved. The rain whispered against the window, the faint hum of the night wrapping around them like a fragile kind of peace. When she finally drifted to sleep in his arms, the drawing lay on the floor beside them, a child's truth in color and shadow. Mark picked it up, staring under the lamplight. His hand clenched around the paper, his jaw tight. This wasn't just a memory anymore. It was the beginning of justice. The storm came without warning. One moment, the air was still, heavy with the weight of summer heat, and the next, the sky cracked open with a sound that shook the walls. Rain slammed against the windows, lightning carved white veins across the darkness, and thunder rolled like the roar of something ancient and angry. Mark had been sitting at the kitchen table, half reading a file he couldn't focus on. The wind outside made the house creak, the kind of sound that set his nerves on edge. It was almost midnight when he heard it, the small, broken sound of a child crying from down the hall. He stood immediately. The girl sat on the floor, warm beside her bed, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her hands. Rex was beside her, whining softly, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder as the thunder rolled again. Mark knelt beside her. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly. It's just a storm. You're safe. But she shook her head. No, it's not the storm. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like the candle flame on the nightstand. Her eyes, wide, glassy, frightened, stared past him into something only she could see. I heard it again, she murmured. The screaming. Mark's chest tightened. He placed a steadying hand on her arm. It's just a memory, he said gently. But then she looked up at him. And in that moment, he knew it wasn't just a memory. It was everything she'd been holding inside. The lightning flashed, flooding the room with brief, blinding light. The thunder that followed shook the glass, and the dam inside her broke. I remember, she choked out. I remember everything. Mark froze, every instinct telling him not to interrupt. She spoke in fragments at first, words tumbling out like shards of glass. He was yelling. I was hiding under the table. She was crying so loud, and he hit her. Her breath caught. The next words came like a scream. He wouldn't stop! Rex barked, one sharp, anguished sound that filled the space between her sobs. He pressed closer, his weight grounding her shaking body. His head rested against her lap, and each time she trembled, he let out a small, broken whine. Mark felt his throat close. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. He wanted to reach for her, to stop her pain, but he knew she needed to let it out. All of it. What happened next? He asked softly, voice trembling despite himself. Her small hands twisted in Rex's fur. He hit her again. The toy. The one with the wooden handle. She stopped crying. A pause. Lightning flashed again. She stopped crying. Mark's chest heaved. He had seen bodies before, walked through crime scenes, and sworn to stay composed. But now his eyes burned, his vision blurred. He could feel the weight of every word pressing down on him. A truth too awful to carry, yet impossible to ignore. The girl went on, whispering now. Rex tried to stop him. He barked, he tried to push him away, but Daddy kicked him. He fell, but he got up again. He kept barking. Rex whimpered softly, as if remembering, as if confirming every word. Mark felt his hand curl into a fist. His police instincts, the part trained to analyze, to record, to build a case, fought against the grief flooding him as a man. The girl pressed her palms to her ears, her voice rising. Then there was a loud crash, and she didn't move anymore. I was so scared. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just hid. I hid while he left. The room fell silent except for the thunder. Mark couldn't breathe. He had to look away, blinking back tears. When he looked back, she was trembling uncontrollably, her words spilling faster, desperate. He said it was an accident. He told the police she fell. But she didn't fall, Mr. Mark. He did it. He did it. Her voice broke into sobs. Mark gathered her into his arms. Hey, look at me, he said through tears. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. But she shook her head, crying into his chest. I should have helped her. I should have. No, he said firmly, pulling her closer. You were just a little girl. You did everything you could. You survived. And because you did, we can make this right. Her sobs came harder, her small body shaking. Rex leaned in, pressing his head between them, his chest rumbling with a low, mournful sound, half growl, half cry. The sound filled the room, ancient, human in its sorrow. The storm outside reached its peak. Thunder roared like the sky itself was grieving. Lightning illuminated the three of them, a broken family, formed from loss and love. Mark rested his chin atop her head, his own tears falling freely. I promise you, he whispered, voice breaking. We'll get justice for your sister. I swear it. The girl lifted her face, her eyes red but fierce. You promise? He nodded. On my life. At that, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with everything she had held back for years. The sound was raw. Grief turned into a storm of its own. Rex lifted his head and howled, a deep, aching sound that cut through the thunder, through the rain, through the night itself. It was the kind of sound that carried pain across time, that told the world something sacred had been broken, and might, just might, be made whole again. Mark held them both, his heart breaking open under the weight of it all. The thunder rolled away slowly, leaving only the sound of rain against the window. Soft now, like tears easing after the storm. In that quiet, he whispered again, more to himself than to them. We'll make it right. I promise. And though the world outside was still dark, something had shifted. For the first time, the truth was no longer buried. It was spoken. It was real. And it was the beginning of justice. The morning after the confession, the world seemed quieter. Too quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving behind streets slick with silver and a heaviness in the air that felt almost sacred. Mark sat at his kitchen table long after sunrise, the girl still asleep down the hall, Rex curled at her door like a sentinel carved from devotion. Before him lay a single sheet of paper, the child's drawing, the dark shadow, the crying baby, the man, the dog. He'd looked at it a dozen times since the night before, each time feeling the same ache twist through his chest. It wasn't just a picture anymore. It was truth, unspoken, undeniable. He picked up his phone and called the precinct. "Hey, it's Harris," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I need to pull an old case. 2009 Maple Street. Child fatality. Closed as accidental." There was a pause on the other end. "That's a cold one, Mark. Why reopen it now?" He glanced down the hallway, hearing the faint sound of the girl's breathing and Rex's low sigh. "Because it was never an accident," he said quietly. The old files came in a cardboard box. Time had yellowed the pages, but the pain inside them hadn't faded. Police photos, incident reports, autopsy details, all written in the sterile, detached language of bureaucracy. Victim, female, 21 months old. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Father's statement, accidental fall. No signs of struggle noted. Case closed. Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand down his face. No signs of struggle, yet the report also noted bruises in varying stages of healing. How had no one questioned that? How had everyone missed what was right there, in front of them? He knew how. Cases like these often slipped through the cracks, filed away under unfortunate, when there wasn't enough proof to fight for more. But now, he had something no one else did. A witness. Over the next week, Mark worked quietly, carefully. He pulled favors from old colleagues, requested access to archives, and revisited witnesses who had long since moved on. He didn't tell the department everything. Not yet. Until he had something concrete. This was between him, the girl, and Rex. At night, when the girl was asleep, Mark would sit with her drawing beside his laptop, tracing patterns between details. Each red mark, each inconsistency. He played old audio recordings from the case and studied the father's voice, cold and rehearsed. Rex, always nearby, would perk up at certain sounds, a tone, a name, a word. One evening, Mark played the old interrogation footage. The father sat across from the detective, his voice flat. "She fell. I told her not to climb. She didn't listen." The moment he said, "climb," Rex lifted his head and growled. Low, deep, unmistakable. Mark froze. "You remember that voice, don't you?" Rex's ears flattened, and he growled again, louder this time, his fur bristling. That reaction told him more than any file ever could. The next morning, Mark visited his old partner, Detective Collins, a grizzled man with a soft spot for lost causes. "I need a favor," Mark said, laying the old file on the desk. Collins raised an eyebrow. "You're digging up ghosts again?" Mark met his gaze. "A ghost with a name. Daniel Moore." Collins flipped through the paperwork, sighing. "He disappeared after the case, didn't he? No forwarding address, no record of employment. Probably changed his name." "That's what I think too," Mark replied. "I just need to find where he went." Collins leaned back, rubbing his chin. "You're doing this off the books, aren't you?" "Yeah." The older man nodded. "Then I'll pretend I didn't see this file. Check Social Security cross-references. Sometimes these guys resurface when they think the world's forgotten them." Mark smiled faintly. "Thanks, old man." "Don't thank me yet," Collins said. "Justice is slow, kid, but it never forgets." Days turned into late nights of searching. Mark's kitchen became an evidence board, maps pinned with red strings, photos taped to walls, timelines scribbled in black ink. Rex lay beneath the table, watching him with quiet understanding. Sometimes the girl would wander in, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Mark would smile. "Go back to bed, kiddo. The grown-ups are still chasing shadows." But she'd always leave a cup of milk by his elbow before she went. Then one night, it happened. Mark sat hunched over his laptop, exhaustion dulling his senses. He typed another search. Background check. Daniel Moore, cross-referenced with domestic violence record and state relocation license. The results were sparse. Then something caught his eye. A man named David Monroe in Idaho. Same birth year. Same eyes in the driver's license photo. Sharp, cold, familiar. Mark clicked to enlarge the picture. The man's face stared back. Older now, heavier, hair shorter, but unmistakable. He printed the image, hands trembling. "Rex," he said softly, placing the paper on the floor. The German shepherd patted over, sniffed, once, then let out a sound Mark would never forget. A deep, guttural growl from the pit of his being. His tail stiffened, teeth bared, the growl to Ursubul, turning into a snarl. Mark's stomach turned. There was no hesitation, no confusion. Rex knew. He crouched beside the dog, voice low and steady. "That's him, isn't it?" Rex growled again, paw striking the paper, as if trying to tear the image from existence. Mark closed his eyes. The pieces clicked together. The bruises, the lies, the silence, the years of hiding. He looked at the dog, then toward the hallway where the girl slept. "It's him," he whispered. "We found him." That night, he stood by her doorway, watching her sleep peacefully for once. The soft glow of the nightlight painted her face in gold, the same color as the morning that had once broken over Maple Street. Rex lay at her feet, calm now, his breathing steady. Mark leaned against the doorframe, voice a low murmur only the dark could hear. "It's time, kiddo. He doesn't get to hide anymore." Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, whispering through the leaves, as if the world itself had been waiting for this moment. For the first time in years, justice didn't feel like a dream. It felt close enough to touch. And in the quiet of that small house, hope began to hum again. Quiet, steady, alive. The sky was the color of iron that morning. Gray, cold, and silent. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Mark stood beside his unmarked car, a chill wind cutting through his coat as he looked at the weathered house across the field. The man who had stolen everything was inside. Rex stood next to him, wearing a dark police service vest. The tag on his collar gleamed faintly under the clouds. Rex, K9 unit, retired. His stance was rigid, focused. He seemed to know that today was not just another patrol. Today was something deeper, older. Mark's earpiece crackled softly. "Target confirmed inside," came Detective Collins's voice. "We move on your call." Mark took a slow breath. His eyes flicked to the photograph in his hand. The face of David Monroe, formerly Daniel Moore. Older, yes, but the same eyes. The same man who had haunted a child's nightmares. He slipped the photo back into his pocket. "We go in quiet," he said into the mic. "No mistakes. This one's for her." He looked down at Rex. "You ready, buddy?" Rex's tail gave one low thump, not excitement, but resolve. The team moved fast, boots crunching against gravel, their breath misting in the cold air. The door splintered under one hard kick, the echo ricocheting through the house like a gunshot. Inside, the man froze mid-step, a half-packed suitcase in his hand. He turned, and for a split second, his face was blank. Then recognition hit, draining the color from his skin. "Police!" Mark's voice boomed. "Daniel Moore! You're under arrest for the murder of your daughter." The suitcase hit the floor. "No!" the man stammered, stumbling backward. "Rate medium." It wasn't my fault." Rex's low growl filled the silence that followed. It was the same sound from years ago. Deep, guttural, primal. A sound that remembered. The man's eyes flicked to the dog, and his panic surged. "You again," he hissed. "You should have been put down." Rex stepped forward, every muscle coiled, eyes locked on the man. Mark raised a hand. "Hold," he whispered, not to the team, but to Rex. The dog froze, trembling with restrained fury. "Hands where I can see them," Mark barked. The man ignored him, retreating toward the back door. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to—" Mark moved forward slowly, weapon trained. "She remembers," he said, voice low but steady. The man stopped dead. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The ticking of a wall clock filled the space between them. "She... what?" he whispered. Mark took another step. "Your daughter, she's alive. She remembers what you did." The man's eyes widened, wild, terrified. "You're lying," he spat. "She was just a kid. She doesn't know anything." Rex snarled again, fur bristling. "She remembers everything," Mark said. "The screams, the toy you used, the silence afterward." The man's body shook. "Stop!" he shouted. "I didn't mean to hurt her. She wouldn't stop crying." "Don't say it," Mark cut in, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare try to justify it." The man lunged toward the counter, a flash of metal glinting as he grabbed a knife. "Drop it!" But he didn't. His breathing turned frantic, ragged. "You don't understand," he cried. "I lost control. It wasn't supposed to—" Before he could finish, Rex moved. The German shepherd lunged forward with lightning precision, not attacking, but blocking. His body slammed into the man's legs, knocking him off balance. The knife clattered across the floor. The man hit the ground hard, gasping as Rex stood over him, teeth bared, but not biting, just guarding, reclaiming the past. Mark was there a second later, gun still trained, cuffs in hand. "It's over," he said, his voice low, steady, full of a pain that had no outlet. "For her, for both of them." He pressed the cuffs around the man's wrists. The cold metal clicked shut. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, his voice cracking on the word silent. But the man wasn't listening. He was crying now. Not with guilt, but with fear. "I didn't mean to. She was just—" Mark turned him toward the door. "Save it for the judge." Rex growled one last time, as if warning him to remember every face he'd broken, every life he'd destroyed. Outside, the wind had softened. Rain began to fall again, light and steady. Mark led the man toward the patrol car, his team watching in silence. Rex walked beside him, head high, every step precise, the soldier returning from battle. Mark opened the back door, pushing the man inside. As he did, he leaned down, close enough that only one person and one dog could hear his words. "She remembers." The man looked up at him, eyes wide, trembling. Mark shut the door. The sound was final, like a gavel striking wood. Back at home, the girl sat on the couch, the world outside flashing with stormlight. In her hands, she held Rex's spare collar tag, the one Mark had given her that morning for courage. She rubbed her thumb over the engraved letters again and again. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing was calm. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of thunder. A car door slammed outside, then footsteps on the porch. She looked up as the door opened. Mark stood there, soaked to the bone, his face pale, eyes tired, but there was something else in them too. Relief. Rex padded in first, shaking off the rain. He walked straight to the girl, resting his head on her knee. "Did you find him?" she whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, we found him." Her hand trembled. "Is he gone?" Mark crouched down, looking her in the eyes. "He won't hurt anyone ever again." She didn't cry. She just wrapped her arms around Rex, burying her face in his fur. The dog stayed still, his tail flicking once, a steady rhythm. Alive, protective, eternal. Mark stood back, watching the two of them. For the first time in years, he felt something lift off his chest, a weight he hadn't even realized he carried. Justice didn't bring back the dead, but it gave the living permission to breathe again. He turned to the window. The rain outside shimmered in the glow of a distant streetlight. "It's over," he whispered. And though the storm still raged beyond the glass, inside that small house peace had finally begun to settle. Fragile, hard-won, and real. The courtroom was colder than she expected. The air smelled faintly of paper, polished wood, and nerves, the kind of place where truth and lies stood side by side, waiting to see which one would last longer. She sat at the witness stand, her small hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were white. Rex lay quietly at her feet, his body warm and steady against the chill of the room. He wore his old service vest, though his eyes, calm and watchful, spoke more comfort than any badge ever could. Mark sat a few feet away at the prosecutor's table, his gaze fixed on her. He gave a small nod. No words, just trust. "You've got this," it said. Across the room, the man who had once been her father sat between two guards. His hair was thinner now, his face heavier with time and guilt. But his eyes, the same gray eyes that had once burned with rage, flickered with something else now. Fear. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound sharp and final. "You may proceed, Miss Moore," he said, his voice kind, softened by the gravity of the moment. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The microphone before her seemed far too close, amplifying every shaky breath. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. Then she looked down, at Rex, at the dog who had stood between her and death itself. And the world steadied. "Can you tell the court what you remember about that night?" the prosecutor asked gently. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "It was raining," she began, her voice small, fragile, but clear. "My little sister was crying. Daddy got angry. He started yelling." The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls. Rex lifted his head slightly, eyes locked on her face. She reached down, brushing her fingers through his fur. "Time 400 balsams." The warmth grounded her, kept her from drowning in the memory. "He hit her," she said, voice breaking. She cried louder, and then she stopped. Her hand froze mid-air. For a moment, the words hung there, raw, unflinching. The defense attorney shifted in his chair. The jurors sat frozen, some with their eyes down, others with their lips pressed tight. Mark's jaw clenched. Every instinct in him screamed to stand, to say enough, to spare her this pain. But this was her truth, and she deserved to speak it. The prosecutor's tone softened. And Rex, what did he do? The girl looked down at the dog, whose tail thumped once against the floor. He tried to stop him, she said softly. He barked. He tried to protect us. He didn't leave. Her eyes filled, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Rex, sensing her trembling, pressed his nose against her ankle. The small gesture drew a faint, broken smile from her, one that carried both sorrow and gratitude. The judge cleared his throat softly. Take your time. She nodded, wiping her tears. I hid under the table, she whispered. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I was scared. When it was over, Rex was there. He stayed. The words echoed across the room. Even the hardest hearts softened. Across the aisle, Daniel, the man who had destroyed everything, shifted in his seat. His hands trembled. For years he had hidden behind denial, behind new names and new lies. But now, with his daughter's voice breaking the silence, there was nowhere left to run. Mark watched him carefully. He saw the man's face crumple, first with disbelief, then with something darker. Shame. The defense attorney whispered something, but Daniel shook his head violently. Stop, he muttered. Just stop. His voice cracked under its own weight. The judge's gavel struck once. Mr. Moore, you will remain silent until— But the man interrupted, his voice rising. I didn't mean to. She wouldn't stop crying. I just wanted her to stop. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, let the record show. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. Order! The gavel struck again, silencing the room. But the words had already done their damage. The truth, once spoken, could not be taken back. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, instinctively curling closer to Rex. The German shepherd growled, low, warning, protective, the same sound that had once stood between them and death. Mark stood slowly, eyes locked on the man who had stolen a child's innocence and buried it beneath lies. That's enough, he said, voice low, shaking with restrained fury. You've done enough. The judge looked to the jury. You've heard the testimony, the evidence, and the confession. It took only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. The girl sat still, hands trembling, breath uneven. Rex's head rested on her foot, his heartbeat steady against her own. When the foreman rose, every sound in the room vanished. Even the rain outside seemed to hold still. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The word hit the air like thunder. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the girl exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sob and a sigh. Mark's hand found hers. Across the room, Daniel Moore buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Whether it was guilt, shame, or fear, no one cared anymore. The judge's gavel came down one final time. Justice has been served. Rex let out a soft whine, as if understanding the weight of the moment. The girl leaned down, wrapping her arms around his neck, her tears falling into his fur. Mark closed his eyes, tears blurring his vision. He had spent years chasing criminals, solving cases, delivering justice in the name of the law. But this was different. This was justice for a child who had once been silenced. The courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters whispered. Cameras flashed. But Mark stayed seated, watching her. She stood now, small but unbroken, one hand on Rex's back, her chin lifted. He met her eyes and smiled through the tears. "You did it, kiddo." She nodded faintly. "We did." Outside, sunlight began to pierce through the clouds, spilling across the courthouse steps. For the first time, it didn't look like a storm was coming. It looked like something new was beginning. And in that moment, surrounded by quiet and the weight of everything they had survived, justice didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like peace. It was late afternoon when they reached the meadow. The air was warm, touched by the scent of wildflowers and the hum of distant cicadas. The grass swayed gently in the wind, golden in the sunlight. The same field where two little girls had once played under the watchful eyes of a German shepherd who never forgot his duty. For months, the world had been quieter. The courtroom chaos had faded into memory, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of healing. The girl no longer woke screaming in the night. The nightmares had softened into whispers, and those whispers were finally fading. Now, as they walked through the tall grass, she was smiling. Not the tentative kind that trembles at the edges, but something real, something warm. Rex ran ahead, his tail held high, his body strong again. He bounded through the meadow like a creature reborn, barking once as if calling them to follow. Mark watched them from a few paces back, his heart swelling in a way he hadn't felt in years. The wind lifted the girl's hair, sunlight catching it like strands of fire. For a brief moment, she looked almost like her sister, laughing freely, untouched by the past. "Slow down, you two," he called, though his voice was filled with amusement more than warning. The girl turned back, grinning. "Come on, Mark," she shouted. "You're too slow." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You sound like your sister used to." The laughter in her eyes softened, and for a second, the joy flickered into something gentler. Remembrance. She slowed, letting Rex trot back to her side. Together they walked toward the far edge of the meadow, where a small cluster of white stones lay beneath a young oak tree. A simple wooden cross stood there, carved with careful hands. "In loving memory, forever in light." The girl knelt before it, her hand brushing the petals of the wild daisies that had grown around the base. She stayed silent for a long time. Rex sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Mark stopped a few feet behind, letting her have this moment. He'd brought her here once before, when she was too young to speak about what had happened. Back then, she had stood frozen, silent, afraid. Now her shoulders were steady. After a while, she whispered, "Hi, Sissy." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a calm strength beneath it. "We did it." Her fingers traced the name carved into the wood. "He can't hurt anyone anymore. You're safe now." The breeze stirred the grass, brushing against her cheek like a ghostly hand. Sunlight poured through the branches above, scattering across the ground in soft golden patches. Rex moved closer, pressing his paw gently on her lap. It wasn't much, just a small touch, but it said everything words never could. She smiled through her tears, laying her hand over his paw. "Thank you, boy," she whispered. "You never gave up on me." Rex tilted his head, as if understanding. His tail brushed against her knee, slow and steady. Mark's throat tightened. He turned his face slightly, blinking back the sting of tears. In all his years on the force, He had seen grief destroy people, turn hearts to stone, families to dust. But here, in this quiet field, grief had become something else. It had become love that refused to die. He stepped closer, kneeling beside them. "You did good, kiddo," he said softly. "Your sister would be proud." The girl looked up at him, eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Rex." Sue 400. Mark smiled. "You didn't need us to be brave. You already were." A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light before falling onto the grass. She brushed it away quickly and laughed. A small, shy laugh that carried more strength than sorrow. The sun began to dip lower, painting everything in a soft amber glow. Rex lay down at her feet, his head resting on his paws, watching the sky change colors. The girl leaned back on her hands, closing her eyes as the warmth washed over her. Mark stood, letting the moment stretch. He watched the two of them, the girl and the dog, who had saved her more times than anyone could count. They were his family now, though none of them shared blood. Pain had brought them together, but love had kept them there. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. "Ready to head home?" he asked after a while. The girl opened her eyes, smiling faintly. "In a minute." She looked back at the memorial, whispering one last time, "I'll come back soon, okay? I'll tell you about school, and about Rex's silly dreams, and how Mark still makes terrible pancakes." Mark laughed softly behind her. "Hey, I'm improving," Rex barked once, almost as if agreeing with her. They started walking back toward the car, the path lit by the last glow of evening. Halfway there, the girl turned around one last time. The oak tree swayed gently, sunlight filtering through its leaves, scattering golden fragments across the cross, like tiny stars blessing the earth below. She smiled, a quiet smile that carried both farewell and peace. Mark slipped an arm around her shoulders as they walked. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Rex trotted ahead, barking at the horizon, chasing the last streaks of sunlight across the meadow. The wind carried his echo, a sound not of sorrow, but of life. As the three of them reached the top of the hill, the sun broke through the clouds one final time. Its golden rays wrapped around them, a man, a girl, and a loyal dog standing together at the edge of a long journey. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Three souls, bound not by blood, but by love, by loss, by survival. Mark looked at them, his eyes wet but smiling. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go home." The girl took his hand. Rex barked again, tail wagging, the light reflecting off his fur like fire. As they walked away, the camera of memory would have panned wide. The field glowing beneath the sun, the memorial beneath the oak catching the last light of day. And somewhere in that golden silence, carried on the wind, came a sound, a child's laughter, a dog's joyful bark, a promise kept. From brokenness to belonging, from darkness to light. They were home. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about heroes in uniforms, but about the quiet guardians who never ask for recognition. Like Rex, a German shepherd's loyalty runs deeper than instinct. It's a kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything. In Rex's story, we're reminded that animals don't just protect us. They heal us. They listen when no one else does. They stay when the world feels empty. And in their eyes, we often find the courage to keep going. If this story touched you, Maybe take a moment to do something small but meaningful. Spend a little extra time with your own dog tonight. Or, if you'd like to understand them more deeply, there's a wonderful resource I use myself. Simple guide that helps people strengthen that bond. At the end of the day, love and loyalty are what truly make a home. And sometimes, all it takes is one look from a faithful friend to remind us how good it is to be alive.